What's up guys, this is Jan for Chess24 and this video we're gonna cover a game from the second most exciting tournament of the year, the Candidates Tournament in Moscow, featuring Hikaru Nakamura, Fabiano Caruana, Anish Giri, Levon Aronian, Peter Svidler, Sergei Kayakin, and the two participants of this video, former world champion Vishy Anand against also former world champion Vasyl Topalov, the two oldest players in the field facing each other. Vishy Anand has won the latest candidate tournament, the last candidate tournament in 2014, qualified for a match against Magnus Carlsen, but went on to lose that match. Many people have written him off after his poor result earlier in the year in Gibraltar, but Vishy Anand has been there, done that, and he's gonna be forced to reckon with, just as Vasyl Topalov, the Bulgarian former world champion, hasn't been very active in recent times. Was not particularly happy about playing in the Candidates Tournament at all, and about playing in Russia ever since his infamous match against Vladimir Kramnik in Elista a long time ago. He has not been too keen about going there, but they both did show up. Vishy Anand with the white pieces. First round of the candidates. Let's see how it goes. Vishy went for 1e4 as he tends to do against Vasyl Topalov. Topalov decides to play the most solid line he has in his repertoire. Move e5, not a knight of battle between those two this time around. Instead, Topalov sticks with 1e5, knight f3, knight c6. No surprise from Vishy, goes for the Ruy Lopez, bishop b5, and the one and only Berlin, the opening that every top player has in their arsenal these days. A lot of guys are sick of going for the endgame after castles, knight takes e4, d4, knight d6, bishop c6, dc, de, knight f5, where black has been doing fine overall, even though I don't think you have to be a prophet to say I'm gonna expect this position to be on the board at some point during the candidates. Not in this game though, because Vishy Anand decides to play the move d3, protecting the e4 pawn, a move that nowadays is just as popular as going for the endgame. Topalov sticks to the main line, bishop c5. This is a position we've seen plenty at top level as well. White faces a choice here between bishop takes c6, c3, and the move played in the game, short castles. Short castles gaining some momentum recently, and a lot of top players have played the move knight d4 here, which always made a lot of sense to me. You get rid of this knight on c6, which traditionally is a problem for black in these positions, exchange it for the white knight, and take it from there. I would have been very curious to see what Vishy has in store against that, but no such thing today, because Topalov went for the other main move, the move d6, just protecting his pawn on e5. Now Vishy goes for c3, controlling the d4 square, and in some lines preparing to go d3, d4 himself. Topalov castles, and Anand plays knight bd2. All of this is mainstream theory, a so-called tabia. We've seen plenty at the highest level. Topalov goes for the trendy move here, the move knight to e7. I'll go on a very brief explanation why this is a trendy move. They used to play a6 here, which looks very natural, questioning this bishop. And if this bishop were to retreat, black has been doing fine. But recent practice has shown, or at least there have been attempts to prove, that the position after bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and here a slow plan like rook e1, intending to go knight f1, h3, bishop to e3, gives white some chances because of the weakness of the black queen side. Even though the last word has not been spoken here, for example, Alexander Grishuk keeps defending this position for black. Topalov decides not to go for this line, and so have many other top players, and they've come to the conclusion that knight e7 is a good move here. The move itself is very logical. You want to regroup this knight. As mentioned, this is a bit of a problem piece on c6, put it on g6. The drawback is that you're giving up the center, because now after knight e7 it has the option of going d4, since this pawn is under attack, is forced to take, and after c takes d4, white gains the, at least on paper, very nice full pawn center with pawns on e4 and d4. But the discussion has been focused around the fact that black argues after bishop b6 he has enough counterplay against these pawns. You can either challenge them with your own pawns by going d5, forcing e5 and then putting the knight somewhere, sometimes even c5, or you can use your pieces to create counterplay. For example, as we're going to see in the game, by going bishop to g4, pinning this knight and attacking the pawn on d4. All of this mainstream theory, I'll let you know once we leave that territory. Not with the next move, this is still well-established rook e1, keeping an eye on the e4 pawn and the e4 square in general. Should black want to go d5, e5, knight e4, he can no longer do this because the rook controls that square. The drawback is you do allow bishop g4, and that's the move played in the game. All of a sudden, threatening bishop takes d4 because of this pin. So white has to react. First move is obvious, you go h3. Another plus of rook e1. Now if black were to play bishop f3 after knight takes f3, both these pawns are well protected, and white would just have the two bishops. So of course Topalov instead goes bishop h5, keeping that pin alive, and this is still a mainstream theory position, but now Anand launches the first surprise. He goes for the move a2, a4 here. Previous discussions have focused around the move b3, unpinning the queen. But it's been a bit unclear what this queen has to do on b3. For example, there's a previous game by Topalov himself where d5 followed e5, knight to d7. Now Topalov played a4, and after a5 he couldn't come up with anything better than retreating his queen from b3 and played queen to d1 back. The position remains complicated, but it goes to show that the queen is not always well placed on b3. And that's where Anand's idea comes in. He wants to keep his queen on d1 for now, play the move a4 and see how black reacts. With a4 he's creating the threat of a5, attacking this bishop. The bishop cannot take on d4 because then white will go g4, breaking this pin and thereby attacking the bishop on d4 with his knight, winning a piece. So this is not a good idea. And black has to react. Topalov reacts with, in my opinion, the most natural move. He goes a6. And he played a5 here, then white would of course see no need to put his queen on b3. And he would have a bunch of interesting options, knight to c4, maybe rook to a3. I'm sure Anand checked all of this carefully in his lab. Topalov plays a6, also freeing the a7 square for his bishop should he need it, and kicking away the white bishop. It goes to f1. Could make a case for bishop e2 or bishop d3 as well, but bishop f1 is very standard in these structures, asking black what he plans to do next. And Topalov, faced with a surprise, plays a non-committal move here, which I believe is good strategy because with the move he played, rook e8, he has a good chance of getting Anand out of his preparation, while it's a safe bet that Anand had checked more direct continuations like d5, for example, looks logical, or knight to c6, trying to attack the d4 pawn in great detail in his homework. Rook e8, perfectly natural move as well, preparing to put some more pressure on the white center, but a little more non-committal, so it gives white a free move, and Anand used that for the logical a5, hitting this bishop, forcing it to a7, because once again, bishop d4, g4 is not a good idea. Bishop a7, and now Anand finally does decide to play queen b3, because there is a target on b7, which this queen can now take a look at. There were alternatives. You could make a case for queen a4, maybe even queen to c2. But queen b3, natural enough, in this situation, probably hoping that Topalov would defend the pawn passively with, let's say, rook b8, where white could put his queen here, having his center defended and his space advantage consolidated with a small advantage. But Topalov is not one of the most feared dynamic players in the world for nothing. He refuses to defend passively here and goes for activity, plays the move knight c6, which does offer a pawn sacrifice, and Anand accepts that. Not so much queen takes b7 immediately, because now just knight takes d4, and black is doing very well. But instead d5 first to get rid of the hanging pawn on d4, not to get rid of it, to put it on d5, and then to later snack on b7. Once again, there's alternatives. The move rook a4 is suggested by the computer, keeping the center intact for now. Could be an interesting discussion for another day. Anand does play d5, very direct, clearly with the idea of pawn grabbing, because after a line that's more or less forced, knight d4, knight takes d4, and bishop takes d4, he does decide to take on b7. If he were not to do that, then white wouldn't have achieved anything. The black pieces are very active. Space advantage doesn't matter so much. Black can regroup with knight d7, knight c5, target the e4 pawn. A lot of active options. So queen takes b7 is very consistent, especially having played d5, but it's also very risky. The bishop leaves this... no, the queen leaves the safety of her home on b3 and embarks on a journey into enemy territory where things could go wrong. But for now, Topalov has to react to queen takes b7. Rook b8 might look logical, but it's not a good idea. The queen just takes on a6, gets out of the way, eating another pawn. But he's planned a much stronger move, the move knight to d7, tending to jump to c5 in some lines, and also clearing the way for his own queen to enter battle from h4 or f6. And all of a sudden, the situation became very tricky. White doesn't have time to calmly retreat his queen. Let's say queen b3, then queen h4. Already very, very painful. No convenient way to defend this pawn. b3, just queen f6, asking the same question again. So you have to do something about that. Anand plays a natural move. He plays knight to c4, intending to meet queen to h4 with bishop to e3. But knight c4 forgets to worry about his queen on b7, which now immediately gets questions. The computer doesn't like knight c4. The computer wants to play a move no human would ever consider, the move rook to a4. But no one would ever consider this because it runs into a knight fork, knight c5. And here's where you normally stop your calculations. Also, Mr. Silicon, he gives queen to b4, and his point is after knight takes a4, queen takes d4. White is lost in exchange, but he has tremendous compensation with a pawn, and the two bishops can follow up with b4, with a nice position for white. Therefore, the computer actually refuses to take and play a move like bishop e5 here, hoping for compensation. But that would have been the best, according to him. Rook a4, as mentioned, not a move many humans would even consider. Knight c4 played, knight to c5, attacking the queen. It turns out the queen doesn't have a safe retreat. After queen b4, now black plays rook b8. You can't go queen d2 because of knight to b3 with a double attack. Well, if you were to go a3, you can tell by just looking at the position that this has not gone well for white. His pieces are too far away from the action, and black can already strike with bishop takes f2, king f2, queen h4 check, tending to take on e1 when white is lost. So the queen cannot go to b4, and it has to go to c6, which looks like a nice outpost at first sight, but it's quite far away from the action, from f2, from b3, from e4. And there's also a more hidden danger to it. It can get picked up on c6 in some lines. This is a crucial point in this game. Topalov had two very tempting options here, maybe three if we count the move he played, but two others which I'll briefly show you. The first one is the very direct, very brutal, and very much in his style. Bishop takes f2 check. After king f2, the pawn is queen h4 check, and if the king were to move, this rook would drop. Therefore, white has to go g3. Black continues giving checks. Knight takes e4. Rook takes e4 is forced. You can't allow black to capture g3. Rook takes e4, queen takes e4. When materially, white is just fine with two minor pieces against the rook, but his king is so alone. And the computer gives black an advantage here, which doesn't surprise me because his king is so exposed. One line, for example, is if you go g4 to cover this square, for example, then black goes queen e1 check, king g2, bishop g6, threatening a check here. And after knight d2, computer already spits out another sacrifice, rook e2, and he claims a very strong attack after bishop takes, queen takes, king g1, just moves the rook out of the way. And he's saying black is better, which I'm not that surprised by, because this king is very, very exposed. Topalov did not go for this. Instead, he went for... No, I'm not going to tell you what he went for yet. I'm going to give you his other option that he could have gone for. It's a very hidden option. I'm curious if he contemplated it. The move f6 looks completely senseless at first sight, blocking his own queen. But it has a very direct agenda. You want to move this rook, and then you want to go bishop e8, and then you want to take this queen, which doesn't have an escape route from the c6 square. Best I could find for white is to go bishop e3 here. Bishop takes, rook to e7. Planning to go bishop e8, and now to sacrifice the queen for as much material as you can get by going b4 to e8. Queen takes a8. Queen takes a8, and b takes c5. When after d takes c5, white has some material and some positional compensation for the queen. He has a knight and a rook. He has a nice structure. But I find it hard to believe that... well, I don't think white can ever be better here, and I think he's going to struggle to equalize, because a queen is a pretty powerful piece. Black can follow up with bishop b5, sometimes f5, opening the position. So this would have been another very decent chance for Topalov. He didn't go for either of those, the direct bishop f2 or the sneaky f6. Instead he played another direct and obvious enough move, knight to b3, occupying this juicy square. But I'm sure Anand was a little relieved here, because now at least his queen is not going to get trapped on c6. He went rook b1, and Topalov plays a second consecutive slightly strange move. He takes on c1, exchanging this passive bishop for his knight. He's probably hoping that his own bishop's going to become dominant, but he is a pawn down, and this operation does strike me as misguided. He could have instead kept the pressure with something like bishop g6, attacking the e4 pawn. And after bishop d3, black could continue putting pressure by going f5, using this pin against the rook, when the situation remains very, very unclear, and more on Topalov style than what he did. He went knight takes c1, rook b takes c1, and the move rook b8, trying to activate his pieces to the max. But the situation has stabilized now. White is a pawn up, there's no direct threats, and Anand correctly calculates that he can get away with capturing another pawn with going queen takes a6. The were alternatives here, like rook c2, covering b2 and f2, comes to mind. Computer also is quite fond of the move knight e3, introducing the idea of queen takes c7, gives white an advantage here. But queen takes a6 is not only a greedy move, but also a good move, because Anand has correctly calculated that he can weather the storm that is the black kingside attack that's coming. Starts with queen h4, targeting f2. White goes rook c2, defending against that. And black has nothing better than going rook takes e4 here, winning one of his pawns back and hoping to activate his pieces further. Maybe Topalov was counting on rook takes e4, queen takes e4, when maybe white is still better, but black would probably get his second pawn back and would be very much in the game. Instead, Anand played a very strong and, at least to me, surprising move here, the move knight to e3, blocking this bishop diagonal and opening this file for his rook. And he has correctly evaluated that black can't do anything too scary. If bishop takes e3, just rook takes e3, takes. The position is simplified, there's no real attack against his king, while white still has his trumps in form of the a-pawn and the weakness on c7. So I believe Topalov realized around here something's gone wrong, there's no way to keep the initiative going, and he had to retreat, probably with a heavy heart, queen to d8, defending this pawn on c7, but a clear sign that something's gone wrong. And Anand follows his last very strong knight e3 up with another terribly strong move, the move queen to c4. Also not obvious, because normally you don't want your queen facing a rook like that, but this can't be exploited because bishop e3 runs into rook e4, and queen c4 also threatens queen takes c7. Topalov plays pretty much the only move, the move bishop g6, covering his rook, so now there is a threat of bishop takes e3, but Vishy had anticipated that, and he plays bishop to d3, once again targeting this rook so that this bishop can't take anywhere, forcing black to go rook to f4, with the threat of bishop takes e3, now that the bishop would cover the rook from e3. But once again, Anand has calculated this, and he's seen that he can go bishop takes g6, when bishop takes e3, attacking the queen could be met with a cool, calm and collected bishop to e4, breaking the attack, saving the bishop, and all of a sudden black has trouble keeping his pieces together. If this bishop were to go somewhere, bishop c5, white could go bishop takes h7, followed by queen takes f4, winning. Therefore, Topalov, after bishop g6, had nothing better than just recapturing with h takes g6. But now, yeah, the black bishop pair has disappeared, and it's clear that black is fighting for survival here, a pawn down, and not a lot of initiative. Anand goes g3, questioning this rook again, has to go back to e4, and he pushes his pawn to a6, which is the most natural move in the world, but it does miss a direct win, once again brought to you by your friend the computer. Rook to d1, attacking this bishop on d4, exploiting the fact that it's pinned for now. The only sensible move is queen f6, defending it, and now there is a quiet move that decides the game immediately. What you want to do is go knight g4, when this queen can no longer stay connected to her bishop. If you do that immediately though, then black has queen to f3, rook takes d4, and rook e1, when all of a sudden things have gone horribly wrong for white. Therefore, instead of knight g4, white would have had to find one slow, nice little move, king g2, covering the f3 square and threatening knight g4. Surprisingly, there's absolutely no way to parry this. Rook e8, knight g4, and black can pretty much resign because he loses this bishop. So Anand missed that chance and instead went for, as mentioned, the obvious move, a6, pushing his passed pawn. But now Topalov really starts digging in and fighting with the move queen to e8, covering his rook on e4, reintroducing the threat of bishop takes e3, and also having a look around what other juicy squares there could be for this queen. Anand plays a clever move, but probably not the best move. He plays the move rook c to e2. It's clever because it parries a threat. Now bishop takes e3 can just be met with rook takes e3, and if you take the queen, white takes the queen as well, and white is winning. This a-pawn remains alive. So it does parry that idea, but it also puts the rook on kind of a passive square, and it allows black some more chances to fight back. Instead, the computer, once again, knows no fear, just wants to take on c7, which normally you'd be reluctant to do because you have to expose your own king. And normally people don't want to enter such a line, especially with some slight time trouble where the king is so open. However, the computer says there's no tricks for black and white is more or less winning here. So rook c2 was played and the battle continues. Bishop to b6, covering c7, also keeping an eye still on the a-pawn. Queen to d3 and rook to a8, attacking the a-pawn. When white is a pawn up, he's still better, but there's a lot of work to do. Anand plays another natural move, which he would play with shortage of time, king g2, leaving this diagonal, but allowing black the launch queen a4. Nice little move, targeting a6 and still staying in touch with the rook on e4. Instead of king g2, the computer wants to play the very deep move b4, probably to stop this queen a4 idea, because then now you could go queen takes e4. So king g2, normal move, queen a4. Anand plays b3, which looks very logical because you can't take on a6 because his rook is hanging. But Topalov meets it with a tricky move, the move rook to d4. You could also go queen d4 when the endgame should favor white. I'm not sure if it's winning, but it should certainly be good for white because this pawn on a6 stays alive. And let's not forget, it's still an extra pawn at this stage. Instead, Topalov plays rook d4, offering another endgame. But after b takes a4, rook takes d3, the a6 pawn will fall. This is what Anand went for. He had a tempting other possibility to go queen to c2. You can meet queen takes a6 with a surprising tactic, knight to f5, unleashing these rooks on the e-file, which I called passive earlier. Here they would be anything but passive. The gf5, rook e8, let's say takes, king h7, knight takes f5. All of a sudden the black king would get mated by the active remaining white pieces. So this was a nice little idea when the computer doesn't want to take, wants to go queen b5. But Anand saw chances in this endgame, probably was also happy to eliminate any risk really, because white can never be worse here, and went for this. He's going to lose his a6 pawn, so his point is after knight takes c4, rook takes a6. He wants to create another strong passed pawn on the a-file by going a5 here, which works tactically because you can't take it rook to a1. This bishop is pinned and rook takes d5. Rook a2 doesn't help. Black loses a piece and the game. So no good. Instead, this bishop has to move. Topalov goes to d4, which is a mistake probably. It was better to bishop on c5 so that this rook stays in contact with the pawn on d5 when the computer line is something like check and rook e7, which looks very scary. But says after rook takes d5, things aren't too bad. For example, rook takes e7, rook f5, forcing the exchange of this rook when black should be alright. This was probably the best chance Topalov has had for a while to almost equalize the position. Not easy for white to keep up the pressure here. Instead he went bishop to d4, and Anand executes the same plan, rook e8, king h7, rook e7. But now this pawn on d5 is no longer hanging, which does make a difference. Topalov had counted on the move he played, rook to c3. We're approaching move 40, by the way. This is move number 39. Both players get extra time after move 40. But yeah, the stakes are very, very high here in these last moves made with little time. Rook c3, attacking the knight on what's a square called c4. And when the idea is after the obvious rook takes c7, black would activate with rook c2. This knight can't step on the way because now there's a pin and black would gain counterplay. Unclear if this would have been enough, but nothing you would allow in time trouble. Therefore, Anand went for the move knight d2. Very deep decision actually. He's abandoning his queen side and he tries to use this knight on the king side to give checkmate. There was another alternative which is very cute. The move rook to e4, probably a move neither player even thought about. The point is after rook takes c4, rook h4 all of a sudden is checkmate, and therefore black has to go to f6, and this knight stays on c4, giving white a decent amount of control, who could now switch to, once again, going pawn hunting with rook f8, intending rook takes f7. Set on went knight d2, as mentioned, intending to get to the black king, and this is move 40, the last move before the time control, and here Topalov commits a decisive mistake. He had to stop this knight from coming to e4 by playing f5. Looks a little radical, but it is needed to stop knight e4. This bishop can go to f6, defending the g7 pawn, and I have my doubts if white has enough to win this position. For example, after knight f3, black goes bishop to f6, and yeah, if this rook goes anywhere, let's say f7, then black could go g5, grab more space so his king doesn't get mated, and then go after the pawns when white is no longer better. There were some stronger alternatives. The computer gives h4 here against this g5 idea, still intending to bring the knight over, but this position is far from clear, and I believe Topalov would have had good chances to hold. Instead, Topalov played the most natural move, the move rook to c2, attacking this knight, keeping an eye on f2, but that allows knight e4. And it turns out that now the three white pieces coordinate so well that the black king is in real trouble. The direct threat is, of course, knight g5 check followed by checkmate. Let's say something like this, doesn't matter where the king goes. This would be the end, which has to be addressed. Topalov addresses it by playing f6, and he probably counted on the fact that this pawn can restrict the knight from e4 enough to not end up in too much of trouble. But here Anand, having made the time control, had a lengthy thought, and he came up with by far the strongest move, far from obvious move, but terribly strong, the move h4. The point is, this king is very long, and you would very much like to checkmate it by going rook f7, rook f8, rook h8, checkmate. But whenever you try something like this, black will go g5 and create a square on g6 for his king. He's still in trouble here, but it's best to not even allow that, and h4 is directed against that, because now whenever black goes g5, white can go h5, and the prison doors are closing behind the black king. There's very little to do against this simple plan of giving checkmate. Another problem is you can never go f5 anymore now that this knight made it to e4, because always met with knight g5 followed by checkmate. So there's really very little to do, and Topalov, well, played the normal move, rook takes a5, taking a pawn and activating his rook. But it's too late. Anand now moves to the checkmating plan, rook f7, strong move, intending rook f8, rook h8. There's very little to do. Topalov tries g5, fighting for the g6 square, no such luck after h5, and the game is pretty much over. There's nothing you can do about this. Rook a2, rook f8 is the end. G6 does not really create an escape route because this is it. Therefore Topalov went for the last desperate chance. Rook takes f2 check, forcing knight takes f2. At least his knight has to go away, but it's cost a whole rook. After rook a2, you're gonna win the knight back because of the pin, but it's not enough because white still has an attack. He goes rook f8, threatening rook h8 once again. Rook takes f2, king h3. There's still no escape for the black. g6 once again, rook f7 and rook h8 checkmate. So Topalov has to keep giving to try to buy his king some space. g4 check, king takes g4, f5 check, hoping that this king is gonna retreat. If it were to go back king h3, all of a sudden the black king gets some air and black is still in the game. The problem is all of this operation has cost black so much material that Anand just took on f5, and he's now a clear exchange up with a good position. If black were to exchange rooks, this endgame is a very simple win because there's still a mating attack against the black king. in addition to the extra exchange, while if the rook goes away, wherever rook e2, then just rook f8. And once again, rook h8 check can only be parried by giving up a lot more material, let's say. Something like this, and black loses the bishop. Therefore, Topalov resigned after rook takes f5, and that means Vishy Anand draws first blood in the Candidates Tournament 2016, wins his game against his old rival Veselin Topalov, increases his score to plus 18 equal 39 minus 13. You see their head-to-head scores over there, and takes the lead in the Candidates Tournament. Great start for Vishy Anand and his many fans all over the world. There are still 13 rounds to go, so of course it's too early to talk about any decisions or whatever, but I'm sure it's gonna give Anand some boost, while yeah, Topalov is not gonna be happy with the chances he missed, especially around move, where was it? 19 here after knight c4, knight c5, queen c6, where both bishop takes f2 check and f6 seem to give him a very promising game. So, tough start for the Bulgarian former world champion, great start for the Indian former world champion. Still a lot of chess to come, so stay tuned. Thank you guys for watching this video. See you soon. Bye bye.